The day Jasmine Williams turned 13, her father Stephen made her a promise that would change her life. "The world isn't always kind," he told her as they sat on their front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange over their suburban Boston neighborhood. "And I want you to be ready for it." Stephen Williams knew what it meant to be a black man in America. As a former military combat instructor who had fought battles both abroad and at home, he carried the weight of experiences he hoped his daughter would never face. But hope wasn't enough. He needed to prepare her. Their neighborhood wasn't exactly unwelcoming, but Jasmine had already experienced the sideways glances, the clutched purses, the subtle shift of bodies away from hers in the school hallways. Little things that weren't quite enough to complain about, but piled up day after day like tiny paper cuts on her spirit. "Dad, I'm fine," Jasmine insisted that day, rolling her eyes the way only teenagers can. "Nobody bothers me." Stephen's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "I pray it stays that way, baby girl. But starting tomorrow, you're going to learn how to keep yourself safe." The next day, Jasmine found herself in a small dojo 15 minutes from their home. The wooden floors smelled of polish and sweat, and the walls were lined with mirrors that reflected her uncertainty back at her. The instructor, Mrs. Chen, was a tiny woman who moved like flowing water and spoke with quiet authority. "Most people think fighting is about being big and strong," Mrs. Chen told Jasmine during their first lesson. "But it's really about understanding your own body and using your opponent's energy against them." At first, Jasmine went to classes only to please her father. 3 times a week, she'd drag herself to the dojo, going through the motions, learning stances and blocks that felt awkward and unnatural. But something changed during her 3rd month of training. A boy twice her size had laughed when they were paired up for sparring. "I'll go easy on you," he'd said with a smirk that made something spark inside her. When he lunged forward, Jasmine sidestepped and used his momentum to send him tumbling to the mat. The look of shock on his face awakened something in her, a quiet confidence that had been dormant. From that day on, Jasmine trained with purpose. Karate became her foundation, but her father made sure her education was well-rounded. Weekends were dedicated to kickboxing with Coach Rivera, a former champion who pushed Jasmine until her legs trembled and her knuckles were raw. "You're small," Coach would tell her, "so you need to be twice as fast and 3 times as smart." By 16, Jasmine had earned her black belt in karate. Her body had transformed, not into something bulky or intimidating, but into a precise instrument. She learned to move with efficiency, to strike with purpose, to defend without hesitation. But most importantly, she learned patience. "The best fight is the one you never have to fight," her father reminded her often. "Your training isn't about hurting others, it's about making sure no one can hurt you." In school, Jasmine kept her abilities private. She was known as the quiet girl who got good grades and ran track. Nobody suspected that beneath her calm exterior was someone who could disarm an attacker in seconds or break a board with her bare hands. She preferred it that way, flying under the radar, focusing on school, dreaming about college and the future that stretched ahead of her. Life wasn't perfect. Her mother worried that all the training was taking time away from normal teenage things. Her younger brother thought it was cool but didn't understand why she couldn't show off her skills at his birthday parties. And sometimes, Jasmine herself wondered if her father's caution was excessive. But Stephen Williams had seen too much of the world to leave his daughter's safety to chance. "Knowledge is a weapon that can never be taken from you," he told her. "And I want you armed to the teeth." None of them could have known how soon those lessons would be put to the test, or that the hallways of Westlake High School would become a battlefield where Jasmine would need every skill she had learned. Jasmine's senior year at Westlake High started like any other. New notebooks with crisp, unmarked pages. The smell of floor polish that always lingered during the first week. Friends catching up in loud bursts of laughter by the lockers. But something felt different this year. A tension in the air that hadn't been there before. It started with small things. Whispers that fell silent when she walked into the cafeteria. Graffiti in the second-floor bathroom that the janitor quickly painted over, but not before several students had seen it. Confederate flag stickers appearing on a few trucks in the student parking lot. "You noticed it too, right?" asked Lai, Jasmine's best friend since middle school, as they walked to chemistry class. "It's like everyone's on edge." Jasmine nodded. She'd noticed more than just the obvious signs. She'd caught the way some students now traveled in tighter groups in the hallways, how certain lunch tables had become more clearly divided, the nervous glances some of the teachers exchanged during assemblies. At the center of it all was Tyler Hoffman. He wasn't particularly smart or even that popular in the traditional sense, but he had a way of drawing people to him, especially those looking for somewhere to place blame for their own problems. His father had lost his job at the factory last year, and rumors said Tyler's family might lose their house. Since then, Tyler had changed. The class clown had become something harder, angrier. "I heard he started some kind of heritage club over the summer," Loy said quietly. "Only certain people get invited." By October, Tyler's group had grown to include about a dozen students. They weren't officially recognized by the school, but everyone knew who they were. They wore the same style of boots and often had matching red bandanas peeking from their back pockets. They called themselves the Patriots, though there was nothing patriotic about the fear they spread. The first real incident happened when they surrounded Deshawn in the parking lot after school. Deshawn was a sophomore who had just moved from Chicago. They didn't hurt him, not physically, but the things they said left the boy shaking. He didn't come back to school for 3 days. "Something needs to be done," Jasmine told Principal Warner, sitting stiffly in one of the chairs across from his desk. 5 other students from the Black Student Union sat with her. Principal Warner sighed, rubbing his balding head. "Unless there's actual violence or concrete evidence of threats, my hands are tied. We can't punish students for hanging out together." "They're not just hanging out," Jasmine insisted. "They're targeting students of color. They're creating a hostile environment." "What you're describing are social conflicts," Warner replied, not quite meeting her eyes. "High school is full of cliques and drama. I suggest you all focus on your studies and ignore any unpleasantness." Jasmine left his office with her blood boiling, but her face carefully composed. Her father had always taught her that showing anger gave others power over you. That night at dinner, she told her parents what was happening. "Maybe you should switch schools," her mother suggested, worry lines appearing between her eyebrows. "Your cousin goes to East Side. You could finish your senior year there." "Running won't solve anything," her father said quietly. "But Jasmine, promise me you'll stay alert. No walking alone, no staying late after school without letting us know." Jasmine nodded, but privately she knew that hiding wasn't the answer. Someone needed to stand up to Tyler's group before things got worse. The following week, notes started appearing in some students' lockers. Not physical threats exactly, but messages like "Go back where you came from" and "Westlake for real Americans." When Jasmine found one tucked into her chemistry textbook, she didn't tear it up like some of the others did. Instead, she carefully placed it in a folder, documenting each incident, building a case that Principal Warner wouldn't be able to ignore. "You're poking a hornet's nest," Lai warned her when she saw what Jasmine was doing. "Tyler's group doesn't mess around." "Neither do I," Jasmine replied, thinking of the years of training, the countless hours spent preparing for a moment she hoped would never come. And somebody has to do something before this gets out of hand. What Jasmine didn't know then was how quickly things would escalate, or that Tyler Hoffman had already noticed her documenting his group's activities. She didn't see him watching her from across the cafeteria, whispering to his friends as they nodded and glared in her direction. She didn't realize that by standing up, she had already made herself a target. The October sky was turning a deep shade of orange as Jasmine walked home from her study group at the library. She'd stayed later than planned, working on her college application essays. The streets were quiet in this part of town, neat houses with raked lawns and pumpkins sitting on porches, waiting for Halloween. Jasmine pulled her jacket tighter against the chill and picked up her pace. Her dad always said to be home before dark, and the sun was already dipping below the tree line. She decided to take the shortcut through Maple Street, which would get her home 10 minutes faster. The sound of an engine revving behind her made her shoulders tense. Something about the rumbling noise felt deliberate, threatening. Jasmine kept walking, not turning around, but her senses shifted into high alert just as her father had taught her. Situational awareness, his voice echoed in her mind. Know what's around you before you need to know. The pickup truck crawled alongside her, matching her pace. It was dark blue with mud splattered along the sides and a Confederate flag sticker on the back window. Tyler was behind the wheel with two of his friends, Alex and Ryan, sitting beside him. The truck's window rolled down with a mechanical whine. "Well, look who's out all alone," Tyler called, his voice carrying the fake friendliness that always preceded trouble. Little Miss Troublemaker herself. Jasmine kept walking, eyes forward. React, don't respond, another of her father's lessons. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Tyler's voice hardened. "What's the matter? Think you're too good to talk to us?" The truck edged closer to the curb, forcing Jasmine to step onto someone's lawn. She pulled out her phone without looking at them, pretending to make a call. The last thing she wanted was for them to follow her all the way home. "We know what you've been doing," Alex shouted from the passenger seat. "Keeping your little list, trying to get people in trouble." Jasmine's heart pounded against her ribs, but her face remained calm. They'd found out about her documentation. She started recording a video on her phone, keeping it casual, as if she was just checking messages. "This isn't your neighborhood," Tyler continued, his voice dropping to something uglier. "People like you don't belong here. Never have, never will." "Yeah," Ryan chimed in. "Why don't you go back to whatever ghetto you crawled out of?" Jasmine's grip tightened around her phone. These boys had no idea that she'd grown up 2 streets over in a house her parents had worked double shifts to afford. That her father was a respected veteran. That her mother volunteered at the same hospital where their families probably got treatment. The truck suddenly accelerated and swerved in front of her, cutting off her path. Jasmine stopped, calculating her options. 3 boys, 1 truck, an open lawn to her right, a house with lights on to her left. Tyler leaned out the window. "Next time we see you snooping around or writing things down about us, you won't get off with just a warning. We know where you hang out, what classes you take, and now," his eyes flicked to the street sign, "where you walk home." Jasmine finally spoke, her voice measured and clear. "Are you threatening me?" "Smart girl," Tyler smirked. "Let's call it a friendly suggestion. Mind your own business, or we'll have to teach you a lesson about respect." "I'm recording all of this," Jasmine said, holding up her phone so they could see the screen. "And I have your license plate." Tyler's face contorted with anger. He spat on the ground near her feet. "You're going to regret that." With a screech of tires, the truck sped away, leaving the smell of burnt rubber in the air. Jasmine watched until it disappeared around the corner, then released the breath she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear, from the effort of holding back. That night, Jasmine showed the video to her parents. Her mother wanted to call the police immediately. Her father sat silently, his face hardening as he watched the recording for the 3rd time. "We're calling the school first thing tomorrow," he finally said. "And the police. Those boys crossed a line." The next morning, Jasmine sat in Principal Warner's office again, this time with her parents beside her and the video evidence playing on Warner's computer. "This is serious," Warner admitted, unable to dismiss the clear threats captured on video. "I'll call these boys in for a meeting and—" "A meeting?" Jasmine's father interrupted. "My daughter was threatened by students from your school. We've already filed a police report." Warner's face flushed. "Mr. Williams, I understand your concern, but let's not blow this out of proportion. Boys this age say things they don't mean." "They meant every word," Jasmine said quietly. "And they'll do worse if nothing changes." As they left the office, Jasmine knew 2 things for certain. The school wouldn't do enough, and Tyler's group wouldn't stop. She would need to be more careful now, and more prepared for what might come next. 2 weeks passed, and things at school seemed to quiet down. The police had spoken to Tyler and his friends, giving them a stern warning about harassment. Principal Warner had put them on a behavior contract, threatening suspension if they caused any more trouble. For a while, it seemed like the system had worked. Jasmine wasn't convinced. "They're just laying low until people forget," she told Lai as they stretched before basketball practice. Tyler was smirking in English class today when Mr. Peterson talked about conflict resolution. "At least they're leaving you alone," Lai said, reaching for her toes. "Maybe they realized you're not an easy target." Coach Rivera blew her whistle, calling the team together. "All right, ladies, let's run some plays before the scrimmage. Jasmine, your point guard for the blue team." Basketball had become Jasmine's favorite escape from the stress of senior year. On the court, nothing mattered except the game. No college applications, no racist bullies, no worried parents checking in every hour. Just the squeak of sneakers, the solid feel of the ball in her hands, and the sweet sound of it swishing through the net. Practice ran late that evening. They had a big game against their rivals on Friday, and coach wanted everything perfect. By the time Jasmine hit the showers, most of the team had already gone home. "You need a ride?" Coach Rivera asked, jingling her car keys. "It's getting dark early these days." "I'm good," Jasmine replied, zipping up her gym bag. "My dad's picking me up out front." But when Jasmine checked her phone, she saw a text from her father, "Running late. Engine trouble. Be there in 30 minutes. Wait inside." Jasmine sighed and texted back, "No problem. I'll wait in the library." She shouldered her gym bag and headed toward the main building, the cool November air raising goosebumps on her arms. The school was eerily quiet at this hour. A few teachers worked late in their classrooms, and the distant hum of the janitor's floor buffer echoed from somewhere down the hall. Jasmine cut through the parking lot, taking the shortcut to the library wing. She was halfway across the lot when she spotted them, Tyler and 4 others, lunging against a car. They hadn't noticed her yet. Jasmine quickly changed direction, heading back toward the gym, but it was too late. "Hey, Williams!" Tyler's voice rang out in the empty parking lot. "Hold up a minute." Jasmine kept walking, picking up her pace. The sound of multiple footsteps followed, growing faster, closer. "I said stop." Tyler was jogging now, his friends spreading out behind him. Jasmine's mind raced through her options. The gym was locked by now. The main office was closed. The nearest open door was at least 100 yards away. She turned to face them, keeping her back toward the lights of the school building. Better to see them coming than to be chased. 5 of them formed a loose semicircle around her. Besides Tyler, she recognized Ryan and Alex from the truck incident. The other 2 were Chris and Zach, both seniors who played on the football team. They were all bigger than her, all carrying that mixture of aggression and anticipation in their eyes. "What do you want?" Jasmine asked, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Tyler stepped forward. "We've got unfinished business. Thanks to you and your video, we've all got police reports in our files now. Coach is talking about kicking us off the team." "You did that to yourselves," Jasmine replied, shifting her gym bag to her left hand, keeping her right free. "You threatened me, remember?" "Funny thing about that video," Chris chimed in. "It's your word against ours about what happened before you started recording. Could have been you provoking us." "Yeah," Zach added. "And now you're gonna delete that video and tell everyone you made the whole thing up." Jasmine's eyes narrowed. "That's not happening." "See, we figured you'd say that," Tyler said, taking another step toward her. "So we came up with Plan B." He nodded to the others, and they began to close in. Jasmine dropped her gym bag and settled into a balanced stance, her body automatically falling into the position she'd practiced thousands of times. 5 against 1, she said, her voice deceptively calm. "Doesn't seem fair." Tyler laughed. "Life isn't fair. Thought you would have learned that by now." "Actually," Jasmine replied as the first of them lunged toward her, "I was talking about how unfair this is for you." What happened next would be replayed and discussed throughout Westlake High for years to come. Time seemed to slow down for Jasmine. Years of training had taught her to see moments like this differently, not with panic, but with clarity. She noticed everything. The way Ryan shifted his weight to his right foot before lunging, how Tyler's eyes darted to signal the others, the small gap between Chris and Zach that could provide an escape route if needed. Ryan came at her first, reaching for her arm. Big mistake. Jasmine sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum to pull him forward while sweeping his leg. He tumbled to the pavement with a surprised grunt, landing hard on his side. The others froze for a split second, not expecting such a precise counter. That hesitation gave Jasmine the advantage she needed. What there Alex started but didn't get to finish as he rushed forward next. Jasmine didn't want to hurt anyone, only to protect herself. She blocked Alex's wild swing with her forearm, then delivered a quick palm strike to his sternum. Not hard enough to cause damage, but enough to knock the wind out of him. He doubled over, gasping for air. "She knows how to fight," Zach shouted, backing up a step. "Tyler, she knows how to fight." Tyler's face darkened with rage. So what? There's still 5 of us. Get her. They came at her from different angles this time. Jasmine kept moving, never staying still long enough to be grabbed or cornered. She ducked under Chris's reach, used his arm as leverage, and flipped him over her hip. The technique was textbook perfect, just like she'd practiced hundreds of times with her father. "This is your last chance," Jasmine called out, her breathing controlled despite the exertion. "Walk away now." But Tyler was too far gone, too humiliated to back down. He charged at her like a bull, all fury and no technique. Jasmine spun away from his rush, but Zach had circled behind her. For a moment, she was caught between them. Zach grabbed her jacket from behind. Jasmine dropped her weight suddenly, breaking his grip, then rose with an elbow that caught him under the chin. His teeth clucked together, and he staggered backward. Ryan had gotten back to his feet and tried to tackle her low. Jasmine jumped back, letting him stumble past, then used a simple wrist lock that sent him back to the ground, howling in pain. "Stay down," she warned him. "I don't want to hurt you." 4 of them were now either on the ground or hunched over in pain. Only Tyler remained standing, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What are you?" he spat out. "Someone who was prepared," Jasmine answered simply. Tyler reached into his pocket and pulled out a small knife. The blade caught the glow of the parking lot lights as he flicked it open. "Not so tough now, are you?" he growled. Jasmine's training kicked into a different gear. Her father had been very clear about weapon defense, avoid if possible, end the threat quickly if not. "You really want to add armed assault to harassment?" she asked, keeping her voice steady as she slowly circled to maintain distance. "That's serious jail time, Tyler." "Nobody's going to jail," he sneered, "because nobody's going to know what happened here." As Tyler took a step forward, a voice rang out across the parking lot. "What's going on here?" Mr. Daniels, the physics teacher, was standing at the edge of the lot, his arms full of papers. He quickly set them down on the hood of a car and hurried toward them. Tyler cursed and closed the knife, shoving it back into his pocket. "This isn't over," he hissed at Jasmine before turning to Mr. Daniels with a completely different expression. "Nothing, sir," Tyler said, his voice suddenly respectful. "Just a little disagreement." Mr. Daniels looked from Tyler to Jasmine, then to the other boys who were struggling to their feet. "Doesn't look like nothing to me," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling security." "No need, we were just leaving," Tyler said, signaling to his friends. But Mr. Daniels had already seen enough. "Stay right where you are, all of you," he ordered, pressing buttons on his phone. "The police need to hear about this." Tyler shot Jasmine a look of pure hatred. "You're dead," he mouthed silently when Mr. Daniels looked away. Jasmine stood tall, her body still humming with adrenaline, but her mind clear. For the first time since this began, she felt something unexpected, not fear, not anger, but a sad kind of pity for Tyler and his friends. They had attacked her out of hatred and ignorance, never imagining she could defend herself. Now they knew better, but that knowledge had only deepened their hatred. As the security guards came running across the parking lot, Jasmine wondered what would happen next. One thing was certain, nothing at Westlake High would ever be the same again. The next morning, Jasmine sat in the police station with her parents, going over her statement for the 3rd time. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the cramped interview room feel even smaller. Officer Chen, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude, tapped her pen against her notepad. "So after Mr. Daniels called security, Tyler and his friends were detained until we arrived," Officer Chen confirmed. "And you're certain he had a knife?" "Yes," Jasmine said. "He pulled it out when he realized he couldn't intimidate me physically." Her father's hand tightened around hers. She could feel the tension radiating from him, though his face remained composed. Her mother sat on her other side, occasionally wiping away tears that she tried to hide. "The school's security cameras captured most of the incident," Officer Chen continued. "The footage confirms your account, and Mr. Daniels witnessed the end of the confrontation, including the knife. Tyler is facing serious charges: assault, intimidation, possession of a weapon on school grounds." "What about the others?" Jasmine's mother asked. "They're being charged too, but as minors with no prior records, they'll likely face less severe consequences. Community service, probation, mandatory counseling." Officer Chen closed her notepad. "You should know, your daughter handled herself admirably. Most adults wouldn't have shown such restraint." Outside the station, reporters had already gathered. Someone had leaked the story, and now it was spreading across social media like wildfire. Black teen girl fights off racist attackers at local high school. "We don't have to talk to them," Jasmine's father said, eyeing the news vans warily. "Maybe we should," her mother replied unexpectedly. "People need to know what's happening at that school." The next few days passed in a blur. Principal Warner called an emergency assembly. The school board held a special meeting. Parents argued at community forums, some defending the boys. "They're just kids who made a mistake." Others demanding action against racism in the school. A video clip from the security camera had somehow leaked online. Though grainy and distant, it clearly showed Jasmine defending herself against multiple attackers. Comment sections exploded with both support and vitriol. "I don't want to go back," Jasmine told her parents over dinner, 3 days after the incident. "Everyone's talking about me, taking sides. It's like I've become some kind of symbol instead of a person." Her father nodded slowly. "I understand. But running away now sends the wrong message to yourself most of all." "Your education matters," her mother added, "and sweetheart, this isn't just about you anymore." Jasmine knew they were right. The day she returned to school, she found a small crowd of students waiting by her locker. For a moment, fear gripped her, until she recognized Lai at the front of the group. "We've got your back," Lai said simply. They walked with her to class, a quiet show of solidarity. In the cafeteria, several teachers made a point of sitting nearby. Coach Rivera gave her a thumbs up from across the room. Not everyone was supportive. Some students avoided her entirely. Others whispered as she passed. A few wore red bandanas in silent protest, a symbol of support for Tyler and his friends. After school, Principal Warner asked to see her. Jasmine braced herself for another lecture about overreacting or escalating the situation. Instead, she found the principal looking unusually humble. "I owe you an apology," Warner said, catching her completely off guard. "When you first came to me about the harassment, I dismissed it. I convinced myself it was just typical teenage behavior." He sighed heavily. "I was wrong, and my inaction allowed things to get dangerous." "What happens now?" Jasmine asked. "The school board has approved several immediate changes, new anti-harassment policies with real consequences, diversity training for all staff, a student-led committee to address racial tensions." Warner looked at her directly for perhaps the first time. "We'd like you to be part of that committee if you're willing." Jasmine considered this. "I'll think about it." As she left the office, she noticed something different. Students were gathering in small groups, talking seriously. Papers were being passed around, a petition of some kind. Adults from the community were meeting with the guidance counselor. Change was happening, painful and slow, but real. The incident had forced everyone to acknowledge what had been simmering beneath the surface for too long. That evening, a local news station asked to interview her. Jasmine agreed, but only if they would focus on the larger issues, not just her personal story. As the camera lights came on, she took a deep breath and prepared to speak her truth, not as a victim or even as a hero, but as a young woman determined to turn a moment of violence into something that mattered. Spring came to Westlake High, bringing with it the scent of new beginnings. 5 months had passed since that night in the parking lot, and for Jasmine, it felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. She stood at the front of the gym, facing a group of 30 students, a mix of ages, backgrounds, and social circles that would have been unthinkable before winter. Beside her, her father watched with quiet pride as she demonstrated a simple wrist escape. "Remember," Jasmine said, her voice clear and confident, "self-defense isn't about hurting others. It's about protecting yourself long enough to get to safety." The Self-Defense and Cultural Understanding Club had been Jasmine's idea, born during those difficult weeks after the incident. What started as a small gathering of 10 students had grown steadily as word spread. "Now pair up and practice," she instructed. "Remember to communicate with your partner. Consent and respect are the foundation of everything we do here." As the students worked together, Jasmine walked among them, offering gentle corrections and encouragement. Lai, who had become her co-instructor, handled the other side of the room. "You've built something special here," her father said when they took a water break. "These kids look up to you." Jasmine shrugged, but couldn't hide her smile. "I just wanted to make something good out of what happened." And good things had indeed emerged from that dark night. Tyler had been expelled and faced juvenile detention for the knife incident. The others received community service and were required to take part in restorative justice programs. Two of them, Ryan and Alex, had eventually reached out to apologize, a painful but necessary conversation facilitated by the school counselor. More importantly, Westlake High had undergone a transformation. The new anti-harassment policies had real teeth. The student-led committee had organized cultural awareness events that actually got people talking to each other instead of past each other. Principal Warner, to everyone's surprise, had become one of the strongest advocates for change, acknowledging publicly that his previous inaction had enabled harmful behavior. Not everything was perfect, of course. Some parents had pulled their kids out of school in protest. Anonymous comments still appeared online, blaming Jasmine for causing trouble or overreacting. A few teachers grumbled about political correctness gone too far. Change never came easily or completely. After class, Jasmine checked her email while packing up her gear. A new message from Georgetown University caught her eye, her top choice school. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "I got in," she whispered, then louder, "Dad, I got in." Her father rushed over, reading the acceptance letter over her shoulder. "Full scholarship," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Jasmine, do you know what this means?" She did. Georgetown had been a dream that sometimes felt too distant to reach. Now it was real, and the essay that had helped her get there had been about that night in the parking lot and everything that came after. Later that evening, Jasmine sat on her front porch with her family, watching the neighborhood kids play basketball in the street. Her little brother was among them, proudly wearing the junior black belt he'd earned last month. He'd started training the day after Jasmine's story hit the news. "I got a call from Mrs. Rivera today," her mother said, passing a plate of cookies. "The school board approved the new cultural exchange program for next year." "That's great," Jasmine replied. The program had been another initiative from the student committee, a partnership with schools in different neighborhoods to break down the isolation that had allowed prejudice to flourish. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lai. "Channel 5 just ran your interview again. You're officially famous." Jasmine smiled. The interview had gone viral, not because of the fight itself, but because of what she'd said afterward. "I never wanted to use what I learned. I trained hoping I would never need to. But now that this has happened, I want to help others find their strength, not just physically, but the strength to stand up against hate in all its forms." Those words had resonated far beyond Westlake. Schools in neighboring districts had reached out to learn about their initiatives. A state legislator had invited Jasmine to speak about student safety. A prominent civil rights attorney had mentored her through the legal aftermath, inspiring her interest in studying law at Georgetown. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Jasmine thought about the journey of the past few months. From fear to confidence, from isolation to community, from reaction to action. "You okay?" her father asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Jasmine nodded, just thinking about how sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes. Her father put his arm around her shoulders. "That's the thing about fighting back," he said quietly. "It's not always about your fists. Sometimes it's about your heart, your mind, and your willingness to stand for something better." Jasmine leaned into her father's embrace, watching the neighborhood children play freely as darkness fell, their laughter echoing down the street. This, she thought, was worth fighting for.